My name is Wedell, and I'm actually a clinical geneticist, and I'm a professor of medical genetics. And normally I work in a clinic for patients with rare inherited diseases, mainly in diagnostics, but also treatment. Not using these methodologies, but still. So rare, severe inherited diseases, that's my profession, so I'm a doctor. So I was happy to be involved in a commission that worked with a translational pathway on particularly germline genome editing, clinical, human, during 2020 and 2019 and 20, I should say. And I'll describe this to you a little bit. First, the background. Why did we do this? As you may know, there were summits on human genome editing. There have been two. There have been many other events as well, of course, but there were in particular two in 2015 and 18. And during these meetings, it was discussed whether one should try to start defining what would be required if someday in the future people would want to attempt to use genome editing in the germline clinically in humans. So it was discussed, but there was sort of an international consensus as this is very much too soon and it will not be realistic for a long time until, as we discussed this morning, in 2018, this man, Jianko He, actually stepped up during the summit and said, I have already done it you can see the DNA sequences of these twins on the screen there. And this actually shocked the international community. And then, of course, people realized we have to do something about this. There's an echo somewhere, I think. Okay. So this was the reason why the commission was started, and it was convened by the US National Academy of Medicine and Science and also the UK Royal Society. These academies together formed the commission, and then they went out to the national scientific societies, and we could nominate participants. So I represented the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, and we were 18 people from 10 countries with various expertise, and mine is then in human genetics. And this is the group, and it was a fantastic group and extremely interesting discussions, and it was chaired by Rick Lifton, who you can see there. He's the president of Rockefeller University, and Kay Davies, who is at Oxford University. So what did we do? Well, we got a charge that was quite detailed. We were supposed to develop a framework of how to do this in the event that it shall be done sometime in the future. But we should not have opinions about whether it should or should not be done. But we should set out a path in the event that one country someday gets to the point of wanting to do this. Which is a difficult task, how to define how to do something when you don't think it should be done. How can we do this without seeming to promote this? So we had discussed that a long time, of course. And we were also charged with considering the technical and scientific aspects and medical aspects, and a bit of the regulatory, but not really the broad societal and ethical issues. And of course, it's very hard to distinguish these. And we had a lot of discussions about that as well, and some issues that are ethical and societal can, of course, not be separated. So that's why these formulations were those that are inextricably linked we could discuss. And we were also charged to discuss all possible applications, including enhancement. So this was how to structure this was something we discussed for quite some time. And at the same time, there has been an expert advisory committee by the WHO working in parallel, and they had the explicit charge of discussing governance and societal issues and ethical issues, and also working both with germline and somatic editing. And we had discussions with the WHO how to do this, and we found an agreement that sort of our report is left for them to continue on with the broad societal issues. So we had 3 meetings. It was in Washington and London, and we had a lot of digital meetings, and we also had public engagements with advocacy groups and the general public, and we had a call for evidence by the Academy's websites that there were questions that could be answered by the general public. So we tried to gather a lot of evidence from the outside. And this is the report that came out in September last year, and I will briefly then summarize what's in this rather extensive report. Well, first of all, it's goes through the science of the technologies, what we know about genetics and disease, and what are the alternatives for people at risk of having these disorders. That was the first part. And then we ended up with 11 recommendations, and I will very briefly go through them. And first of all, we conclude that the criteria have not been met, and it was quite important to be very clear that this is not a way of advocating this. It should actually not be done at the moment, as we have already discussed this morning. And the Secretary General of the WHO made a statement during this time as well, so there was no misunderstanding. But what we were supposed to do was not just say no. That's pretty easy. We were supposed to really elaborate how, in the event it will be done. So the recommendations are 11, and they are divided. So the first 4 are sort of key messages, overall key messages, and I summarized a little bit here. And first, again, it should not be done, HHGE, that is human heritable genome editing, until it has been clearly established that we can do it efficiently and reliably. And as we heard this morning very elegantly, we don't yet have the technologies to do this on target, without off target, without mosaicism, etc. And we don't, even if we could, we can't measure it and have an embryo left to work with. So it's really not possible at the moment. But we promote research. We think further research is important and necessary. And also, if a country... Should I go on? If a nation sometimes decide to... Is there an echo? I'm not sure if I hear something. Oh, sorry. If it is decided somewhere to do this, there have to be national and international mechanisms to make sure that there are requirements that have been met, and the requirements are in the rest of the recommendations. And also a key attitude towards all of this is safety first, and that is, it has to be done, if it is done cautiously, with careful consideration, what would be the first in man, and then every threshold should be carefully considered, and so it should be incrementally. Those are 3 of the 4 key messages. And then this is just what the boxes look like in the actual report. I don't have to go through them, but it summarizes what I just told you. And the 4th of these key then it was how, if sometimes someone starts, what application should that be? And to be able to do that, we considered, first of all, the phenotype, that is the disease or trait, because we were charged with discussing even enhancement. So we discussed the phenotype, and we discussed what do we know about genetics, and we also discussed that this morning. We know very little, in fact. We know for monogenic diseases what gene can cause a disease or mutation, but for the most part we know very little. And also we discussed whether there are alternatives. So based on those 3 considerations, we arrived at 6 categories of potential or possible applications, where the first category would be a serious monogenic disease, single gene disease, where all children would inherit the disease, which is a very rare situation. That would be where one parent is a homozygote for a dominant disease, or both parents are homozygous for a recessive disease that is serious. So this is a very, very narrow or high bar, but it's not zero. There are such cases, but they are of course very, very rare. And this is because then in those situations you have zero chance of producing an offspring that does not inherit the disease. So you would not subject a potentially healthy embryo to any risk. And the category B is the same type of disorders, but then in a more normal situation, so the parents could have either healthy or non-healthy offspring, and they have alternatives for PGD, which category A do not. And then we have less severe conditions in category C, and then we have polygenic. As I say, C is less severe monogenic, when we know genotype, phenotype. And D is polygenic, which would be psychiatric or cardiovascular, most disorders where we don't really know the connection. We don't even know what we would edit to prevent the disease. And then we had enhancement in category E, and we discussed that. And then we have monogenic conditions that cause infertility, because that is a separate issue, of course. And by doing this, we arrived at a potential initial use so that would be restricted to what you can see here, a serious monogenic disease, and also that the variant to be changed would be into something that we have experience with in the population, not creating something unknown. And also no unaffected embryos should be subjected to editing, and this is why it is in these very few instances where no unaffected offspring can be produced, and in families who have very poor or no options apart from this. And this is just what the recommendation looks like, what I just said. And if you're in, we discussed also what is a serious disease. You can discuss that at length, and we were very clear that we did not want to make lists. We rather defined it very loosely as a serious disease causes severe morbidity or premature death. So those were the first key 4 recommendations, and then there are translational pathway recommendations 5 to 7, and this essentially just describes what would a team have to show a regulatory body to be able to get a go-ahead to do this. That's the translational pathway. And we define preclinical research in cells and animal models, and you also have to do research in the human embryo. We heard very nicely from Fredrik this morning that we don't know how a human embryo behaves by only doing animal embryos. So we have to do human embryo research to show all these things that we have not yet shown, on target, not off target, not mosaic. We also have to, the team would also have to show that they intend to follow the actual embryo that would be then transferred in conventional ways that is done by IVF today, but also that there is no harm done by the technology. And there have to be protocols for informed consent and follow-up. So this is the translational pathway, and the recommendations, I don't have to go through them, 5, 6. And also we had a recommendation 7, that because there is a potential that in the future we may be able to do gametes or germ cells from stem cells, which we cannot do today. And that would change this totally. And that would require very distinct discussions on ethics and societal issues, and of course safety. But we think we should promote research also in this area as an alternative, which would lead to a lot of other, of course, different questions. So then we have 8 to 11, and those are concerning governance, which is more a WHO thing, but a little bit for us. And of course, the problem is, or the situation is, that there is no international legislation or jurisdiction, of course. Every country decides. And this is probably the most difficult part, because in Sweden we're not worried that this will happen in a rogue way or in an unresponsible way. But the case is very different in other parts of the world. And we cannot really set those standards, but we can try. And this is why I think the academies actually did something very important here, to show that scientific bodies can actually try to affect things. So we had a long list of things that has to be done in a nation, we think should be done in a nation before considering to proceed with this. And some of these things are there have to be regulatory bodies that have to follow the international developments, and it should be a case-by-case evaluation in a very transparent way. And the actual recommendation is a lot longer, and I don't think I have to go through it all, but it has to follow scientific conduct and make guidelines, standards, policies, publish results, be transparent about attempts, and follow international developments, take part in discussions, etc., etc. So quite detailed what we think a country should do, and all of these things should be in place in a country before a country tries. And then we have the international governance mechanisms that we propose, and they are recommendation 9 to 11, and they are on 3 levels. So we advocate or propose that there should be an international scientific advisory panel, the ISAP. And the job of this panel is to continuously monitor development technically and scientifically and revise this report and reconsider whether it should be changed in any way. So that's sort of the scientific part. But then there needs to be another international body which is broader, with a more diverse membership beyond science and medicine. And so the ISAB should sort of be an under thing to the other body to present the scientific evidence. And whenever a threshold is crossed, it should be discussed in this broader international body. And also the third part here is that there has to be some type of whistleblowing mechanism. Because when Janko Hayes did his work, people actually knew about it, but there were no real format or mechanism for raising concern. So this is what recommendation 9, how it is explained in the summary of the report, the ISAP, and the other international body with a standing, and the whistleblowing mechanism. So this was our report, our main conclusions, and after this, so our commission is actually closed. We have no task, but there has been a lot of events and discussions, and we have made ourselves available to a lot of things. And also, of course, the next important part was the WHO, which we will hear in a minute, I understand, and that report was published in July this year, taking this further and taking our recommendations into consideration. And also there will be a third summit in the same context in March 2022. And at this summit, the report will be considered again, and the whole discussion will be taken forward on an international level. And that was my last slide. Thank you very much.
There will be room for 1 or 2 questions or question and answers from the internet. Is there anyone in the audience who wants to have a question? I have a question. I start and you think. My question is this idea about having a scientific medical expert group discussing this and then a broader group. From my experience, that's not a good idea. So I will test it on you. I think it's extremely important because the scientists and those working in medicine are not always experts in detecting the legal problems, the ethical problems, etc. And vice versa, the ethicist needs scientific guidance. And in order to come to well thought out advices or whatever recommendations, I think we have to work together and work together from the beginning. A reflection.
I totally agree, but the idea is that the technology is so quickly moving and so advanced, so someone needs to collect that evidence and then be part of the broader group. So there is sort of a basis for those discussions, but it should definitely be done together, absolutely. But it should be based on the current state of the science, so the discussions are sort of have all information. But I agree with you, that is the idea.
And what about politicians? One of the hallmarks of our National Council on Medical Ethics is that we have politicians from all parties. But my experience from Brussels is that the politicians, we are on floor 3, the politicians are on floor 13. It takes a long time to take the elevator up and down.
Yeah, so we haven't specified, and it actually wasn't our remit to do so. And we had to discuss with the WHO that we didn't step over our lines when we made these recommendations. So it's really up to them. And our biggest question was, who shall do this? And as I understand the WHO report, the main thing is that they clearly step up and say, we will do this, which is great. Because it was very unclear, is there such a body? Will anyone actually take on this task? And I have understood that they will. So how to define it and who should be in there, that we haven't done. But of course, politicians are extremely important.
Yes, Santa.
Thank you so much, Anna, for your insights. Closer. Thank you so much, Anna, for your insights. Santos Lockenberg, Dr. of Medical Law. You briefly touched upon the governance of and national sovereignty on decision-making and their responsibility. So I wonder whether you have any further reflections. What should be taken into account? How should states go about it? How should states think about the freedom they have to the extent they have the freedom? Thank you.
Well, I guess what we tried to define in recommendation 8, I guess, was what we think each nation should have in place before doing this. That's sort of how much we have thought about it. And actually the biggest concern, I think, is that people will just do it, as has already been done. And we cannot prevent that, but we can try to set standards, and we can also try to be really international in defining this. We think this is a responsible way, but there is no way of enforcing that, of course. So this is a dilemma, but you have to try. Maybe this is important enough to change that, to make something possible. And so this is just a start. And I hope that this is just a start, because it would be really interesting if we could come together internationally and find ways of doing that we haven't done so far. The best way, I think, of international sort of in medicine collaboration is the pandemic surveillance, WHO. But that is more of collecting data, but we need something more in that area as well. So maybe the time has come for more international efforts to actually try to enforce things. This is difficult, of course.
Of course, ethics.
Yes,
to be part of it, and the legal questions.
Absolutely.
I think I fully agree.
That was my reason for being in this commission. I thought it was such a good initiative to try to do something on an international scale, even though because that was the argument, you won't be able to change anything, and I don't necessarily agree, actually. Yes, there were some hands. Yes.
Wait a second, you get the microphone. And don't forget to say who you are.
Hi, my name is Amal Matar. I'm from the Center of Research, Ethics and Bioethics at Uppsala University. I was wondering how the Commission was representative of the Global West. Were there any Global South? Was there anybody, medical doctors or experts from other parts of the world?
In different countries, except Antarctica. But every other continent.
Sven-Erik.
Thank you. My name is Sven-Erik Söder, and I'm the chairman of SMER. I have a more maybe practical question. I mean, you are participating in an international commission. Do you think that the scope is too big? I mean, we try to put forward legislation on the European level. For example, we have EMA, so we do approve. We do the improvements of pharmaceuticals on the European level. Do you see it? Do you think it is possible to go the European way and to see that as a first step in terms of coming together on certain standards?
Possibly. I have no definite answer. I would rather like the global approach here, because the scary parts are not in Europe, I would say. What you can be afraid of is exploiting people, of course, because you can really exploit people who desperately want healthy children and promise things on unscientific grounds and make a lot of money. And we know how people are sort of vulnerable to that. And that I don't think will happen in Europe, certainly not in Sweden. So I really would like to reach those, that would happen. But of course, I think you have to work on every level, and that's what we didn't mention Europe as an entity, but international, national. But maybe, as long as it doesn't prevent the global, but I don't see any reason for that. So maybe that's a good idea. I think usually in these sort of systems things, you need to work in every part of the system. That's my experience.
And the European Group of Ethics said that we have the European pillars of rights and pillars of values, etc., and we want to use them in order to go into a global collaboration, and that's the idea. So I think that's...
I guess every effort is important.
So thank you very much.